Mandate of God was considered the mightiest ship within the Zlain theocracy, and among the contenders for the most capable dreadnought operated by the Concordat. Superior engineering and protection compared to her peers allowed her to prevail in numerous engagements, even against formidable foes or overwhelming odds. But these were not her peers. The Concordat's most brilliant strategists planned this operation thoroughly, with commendable zeal and religious discipline. But, even if caught by complete surprise, the defending forces unleashed a devastating barrage that crippled or outright destroyed most of the warships unfortunate enough to form the attacking vanguard. As Sergeant Xylo was gearing up, he wasn't aware of the finer details regarding the unfolding battle. But, listening to the reports over the ship's intercom, he figured it wasn't going as hoped. Even without hearing the desperate voices of damage control or ignoring the constant tremors and impacts the ship was subjected to, it was evident that the Mandate of God was not in good shape. The sudden lurch forward and the loud boom echoing through the ship indicated the complete loss of power to the main thrusters. Meanwhile, the flickering lights before the general blackout and the humming of the emergency LED bulbs confirmed the incapacitation of the reactor core. He wasn't surprised when his superiors ordered him and his men to the armory. Yet the mental preparation could not distract him from the unnerving conclusion everyone had reached once the command was given. There could be only one reason for a detachment of infantry aboard a starship to ready themselves. The arsenal room was quiet, even if sprawling with soldiers. No one uttered a word as they loaded their rifles and wore their gear. Not much was said by the lieutenant as he briefed the troopers. There was not much to be said. Still, the old saying that no plan survives contact was true, even more so when dealing with a relatively new race to the galaxy. But the possibility of the enemy foot soldier being as fierce as their warships was a constant torment in everyone's mind. The sergeant, even if worried about the safety of his men and that of himself, did not question his orders. As the platoon formed a long column, they hurried toward the main hangar, with Xylo's squad at the rear of the formation. The corridors of the ship, engulfed by an eerie darkness, appeared more hostile and claustrophobic than usual, as debris, sparks, and fumes from electrical fires impeded most of their movements. As they arrived, numerous squads already occupied makeshift fighting positions. Some were behind damaged starcrafts, while others positioned themselves on catwalks and other elevated positions. The lieutenant trusted Xylo and his judgment as one of the most experienced troopers of the platoon. He ordered the sergeant and his group to stand by the blast door, with instructions to shut it close if the situation demanded it. Unending minutes went by as nothing but the black void of space presented itself on the other side of the magnetic gate, keeping the precious breathing gases within the ship while allowing objects to pass freely. Then Xylo noticed something out there, steadily approaching. Others might have been first to spot those objects, but he was the first to point them out. A dozen or so, maybe more, maybe less starcrafts, roughly the size of a heavy fighter, flying in an orderly formation behind a larger one, seemingly leading the way. After steadily slowing in, the smaller crafts halted a few dozen meters from the mouth of the hangar as the first kept moving unchallenged. The soldiers took aim, holding their breath, eyes locked on the target, waiting for the starcraft to step through the magnetic field. Breaking the silence, a hailstorm of bolts raged toward the impudent vehicle that dared to cross the threshold, but simple rifles of subpar quality could not hope to dent what was intended for a human battlefield. Smoke grenade launchers discharged a thick gray wall before the attack craft, concealing it from the defender's naked sight. The Terran gunner then acquired targets using thermal cameras and infrared sensors. As the Zlainians kept blindly firing in that general direction, the machine kept hovering, unbothered, as the projectiles were ineffective and only managed to scratch off the paint. The squeaking of their guns was suddenly hushed by the roar of a 40mm autocannon, mounted underneath the gunship's nose, tearing everything it pointed at, to shred at 500 rounds per minute from a dual-purpose HET API belt. As the rounds whizzed by, they displaced the smoke from their trajectory, creating a deadly show of lights as the gray cloud of particles was illuminated by the flashes of gunpowder explosions. Evidently not satisfied with the results, a storm of rockets disintegrated most of the soldiers and the cover they were shielding behind. Xylo would have suffered the same fate if not for someone pulling him by the collar behind safety. Just as he fell on his back, a burst of automatic fire caused a chain of impacts and explosions just where the sergeant was standing. Struggling to stand back up, as the concussive force was significantly more than his eardrums could tolerate, Xylo was relieved to know all his team was still in one piece, something that could not be said for the rest of the platoon. Calling over one of his men, he instructed him to peek into the hangar using the corner camera he was issued. They then huddled behind the bright screen. Besides the smoldering debris and the carnage, the Zlynians could hardly see anything else due to the smoke. They kept quiet, listening to the distinctive high-pitched noise of the human gunship. They noticed that several other machines with similar noise profiles had just passed through the magnetic field, as the sound of their propulsion systems could now freely propagate through the artificial atmosphere. They realized these were most likely the starcrafts that had held back, possibly troop transports. First, they heard the unique sound of hydraulics, then the clang of heavy metal objects impacting the steel deck of the docking bay. Xylo attempted to close the blast door, but the control panel was too damaged to offer a readable interface. Without attempting a physical override, the small group retreated deeper inside the ship as they heard several footsteps moving toward them. Even if fast, the Zlanians could not outrun the assaulters, outfitted with space-rated armored power suits. Before they could reach the momentary relief of a secondary walkway, a stream of bullets gunned down one of the soldiers. Xylo took point just behind the corner. He briefly exposed himself to locate the enemies. Regrettably, he could not see much before backing behind cover, as the emergency lights did not provide much illumination. Nevertheless, he managed to spot numerous dark shapes and shadows silently moving about along the walls of the long corridor. Just as he was about to peek again, this time to open fire, a hail of lead impacted a few centimeters from his head. Stunned and under suppressive fire, the sergeant was forced to relocate with his team as he heard several enemies rushing his position. Another burst from one of the Terrans, another Zlanian soldier motionless on the ground. Enraged, Xylo fired blindly from behind the relative protection of the nearest pillar. Caught in a panic, the youngest of the team gave away his position in an attempt to contribute to the fight. He was taken down by a single loud boom that echoed with a terrifying tune in the lightless corridors. Looking at the lifeless body, Xylo noticed how the uniform was sparsed with several punctures of relatively small diameter. He loudly cursed the humans for using pellet launchers, calling them barbaric and uncivilized. With no hope of achieving fire superiority, the sergeant ordered his remaining troops back, even deeper within the ship. After costly exchanges with no sign of success, the team reached a barricaded position that served as a checkpoint prepared by other Zlanian soldiers. These appeared to be better prepared, as they managed to take down two of the pursuing enemies. A quick scuffle ensued. It seemed to end quickly as the humans stayed behind cover and tended to their casualties. Meanwhile, Xylo regretted not doing the same for the fallen comrades. Regardless, he felt safer, knowing there were over 50 steps of unobstructed line of fire between them, as well as a repeating bolter gun operated by his allies pointed straight at the assaulters. Hoping to have a moment of respite, the sergeant turned toward his fellow Zlanians troopers. He could not even begin to plan their course of action when a small metallic cylindrical container landed a few arms' length from him. He did not know what it was, but his instinct and prior experiences highly recommended him to move. He didn't think fast enough, as after a flash and a loud bang, his sight and hearing were severely debilitated. In a blind panic, he swiftly crawled away, opposite from where the humans were known to be. He was about to get up and run when, as if under suggestion by a higher entity, he turned around to look at his comrades. While they were rolling painfully on the ground, their hands on their eyes and ears respectively, he saw a figure silently walking up to them. Xylo could not see it clearly, but it was obviously from Earth. Distinct in the arrogant step and the weightier presence, he was sure it was a human, a dirty Terran. What caught its attention was a little feeble flame stuck at the end of what he thought was the tip of a rifle. For a moment he was mesmerized by it. a little light in an endless sea of darkness. He was almost drawn to it, needing the certainty that only eyesight can provide when there's enough light. Only for a moment, though, as a wall of fire was spewed against them. Fortunately for Xylo, he was not the intended target, but unfortunately for his conscience, his companions were. He watched in terror as the flames stuck to them, how the heat melted their uniforms, fusing them to their skins. The screams were etched within his soul, undeletable from his memories, along with the terrible stench, the smell of burnt flesh and chemical compounds, the scent of guilt and despair. He turned around and ran. In a blinding dread, he ran as fast as he could. He thought of many places to hide or seek help. But all around him, the echoes of fierce fights and the silent aftermath of deadly encounters guided him to the only place he felt could keep him safe. When he reached the bridge, he pleaded with the officers to shut the doors, to seal them close. Once they did, he explained his tragic struggles and the ferocity of the attackers. He had just finished talking when faint, distant noises could be heard behind the reinforced wall where the main corridor would be. Xylo got close, shivering all the way down. He heard muffled and indistinct sounds. He heard no voices, but one thing was clear. Something was being placed on the door. Even if a thick layer of composite armor was between him and those humans, he felt no more secure than if he were behind a thin glass panel. As he stepped back, he heard a distinctive sound, the byproduct of thermite burning at over 2,500 degrees Celsius. On the door, a red-hot incandescent shape was taking place. 2 vertical and 2 horizontal lines seemed to form a rectangle of just under 2 meters high and 1.5 wide. 2 lines connected the opposing angles, dividing the geometrical figure into 4 triangles. Had Xylo known of his misfortunes, he would have never come to Saul. The Zlane theocracy wasn't aware of the human naval infantry's disdain for surprise parties, let alone their policy of warm welcomes. Back then, the broader galaxy was unfamiliar with the humans, yet they were very familiar with war. He gulped down and stepped back as the door exploded,